Audrey Vance sat at her parents' dining table in Syracuse, New York, watching the warm steam rise from her mother's Sunday pot roast as the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7. Beside her, her 38-year-old brother, Brandon, was waxing poetic for the third time that evening about the granite countertops in a 4-bedroom colonial on Sycamore Ridge. Brandon was currently between consulting gigs, a vague professional title that, as far as Audrey could tell, mostly involved sleeping until 10 and discussing passive income over coffee. Suddenly, their father, Arthur, set his fork down, reached into his corduroy jacket, and slid a crisp white envelope across the floral tablecloth directly to Brandon. "Your mother and I have been talking," Arthur said softly, his voice carrying the quiet, practiced finality of a man handing over a life raft. $60,000 from our retirement account for your down payment. You simply can't get a real start in today's housing market without a hand up. Brandon's eyes welled with emotional gratitude as he embraced their parents, his relief overflowing into the warm, gravy-scented room. Audrey remained completely frozen, her fork hovering in midair as her mind instinctively ran the relentless arithmetic. $60,000 represented 9 agonizing years of her pediatric intensive care unit night shifts, holding feverish, frightened toddlers through the dark hours while the rest of the city slept peacefully. Waiting for the moment her parents might turn toward her with equal consideration, Audrey cleared her throat gently and voiced a question she had swallowed for years. "That's wonderful for Brandon," Audrey said softly, trying to match the warm, celebratory rhythm of the room. "I've actually been looking at houses myself. Is there any chance of help for my down payment when the time comes?" A sudden, heavy density settled over the dining room table. Arthur immediately found something fascinating on his dinner plate, avoiding all eye contact, while her mother, Evelyn, folded her linen napkin with deliberate, practiced grace. Evelyn reached across the table, patted Audrey's hand twice, and delivered the sentence that would quietly reshape the rest of Audrey's life. "Oh, honey, you can rent somewhere," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with a casual, dismissive sweetness. "You've always been fine." Brandon let out a light, easy chuckle, the effortless laugh of a man whom the universe perpetually agreed with, before changing the subject back to kitchen fixtures. Underneath the ivy-patterned tablecloth, something deep inside Audrey quietly clicked shut. She ate the rest of her meal in silence, realizing that her independence had never been celebrated by her family. It had merely been used as a convenient excuse to abandon her emotional and financial needs without a second thought. Driving 20 minutes back to her cramped apartment above a noisy laundromat, Audrey listened to the rhythmic thumping of commercial dryers vibrating through the floorboards beneath her feet. In the quiet solitude of her small kitchen, she didn't call a friend to vent or shed tearful tears over the evening's painful snub. 9 years in the pediatric ICU had conditioned her to follow a strict clinical sequence when faced with critical data. Chart it, fix it, and move on. Sitting at her Formica table with a yellow legal pad, she wrote down a single number at the top of the page: $48,212. That was the exact balance sitting in her private savings account. Money built $500 at a time through double shifts and extreme frugality since she was 23. In the Vance household, financial help moved like water, flowing downhill strictly toward whoever was currently drowning. Because Brandon totaled cars, defaulted on credit cards, and quit career paths, he received continuous rescue packages. Because Audrey worked summers, paid her own nursing tuition, and drove a 12-year-old sedan, she was classified as fine. She realized her mother operated under a cruel version of emotional triage. Resources went only to the sinking, while the self-reliant were left to swim alone in the dark, without a life vest. Standing at her window, watching a neighbor carry a trash bag of laundry across the parking lot, Audrey held her phone warm against her ear the next morning. She called the local credit union, where she had banked since nursing school, speaking with a blunt, gum-chewing loan officer named Denise. After running Audrey's single-income nursing numbers, Denise quoted a maximum mortgage pre-approval figure that landed nearly $30,000 below what Audrey had hoped, on account of a nurse's salary being a nurse's salary. Audrey felt a momentary pang of doubt, asking if that modest amount could truly buy anything worth owning. Denise popped her gum over the line and replied with unvarnished Midwestern practical wisdom. "Depends on whether you're picky, hun." Right then, Audrey decided that the bank's modest number would be enough, simply because she possessed the discipline to make it enough. She was entirely done asking anyone at her parents' dinner table for permission, validation, or financial backing. Over the next month, she immersed herself in real estate literature, spending her clinical break hours reading every book the public library owned on multifamily properties. She learned the mechanics of FHA loans, cash flow calculations, and property management, realizing that if she wanted security, she would have to build it brick by brick without anyone's safety net. On the second Tuesday of April, Audrey descended the creaky wooden stairs into a church basement off Wayne Avenue for a meeting of the Greater Syracuse Real Estate Investors Association. Sitting in the back row, among flippers and expensive boots and seasoned landlords, she spotted an elderly man in a worn Carhartt jacket who spoke rarely but commanded immediate reverence when he did. His name was Harlan Miller, 71 years old, 40 years a landlord, down to his last few buildings, and famously unimpressed by amateur dreamers. During the coffee break, Audrey approached him directly, stating clearly that she intended to buy a duplex, live in one unit, and rent out the other to cover her housing costs. Harlan inspected her with steady, unblinking eyes, as if evaluating a structural load-bearing wall. "Everybody wants to be a landlord," Harlan grunted, refilling his styrofoam coffee cup, "until a tenant's toilet overflows at 2 a.m. He walked away without another word, but Audrey felt an unexpected surge of quiet joy. Harlan hadn't dismissed her ambition as impossible. He had simply stated the operational price of admission, and hard work was a currency Audrey understood better than anyone in her family. She left the church basement knowing her journey had officially begun, ready to face whatever came next. By late May, after weeks of scrolling through real estate listings during her 3 a.m. hospital break hours, Audrey found a property that smelled, in every sense, like a true beginning. It was a 1924 brick duplex tucked away on Wren Street, featuring twin front porches, sagging gutters, and solid load-bearing bones beneath decades of faded paint. Listed at $148,500, the building was uniquely suited for her budget through an FHA loan, a government-backed mortgage program requiring just 3.5% down, which came to roughly $5,200 out of pocket. Unit B was occupied by a quiet, long-term tenant named Mrs. Clara, who paid $850 a month in rent, while Unit A stood vacant, ready for Audrey to move in. With her estimated total monthly mortgage payment landing around $1,140, including property taxes and insurance, Mrs. Clara's rent would cover the vast majority of the loan, leaving Audrey with a personal housing cost of less than $300 a month. Denise at the credit union popped her gum softly over the phone as she walked Audrey through the preliminary underwriting steps, marveling at how cleanly the financial numbers aligned. For the first time in her 32 years, Audrey realized that she was not merely spending money to keep a roof over her head. She was entering a self-sustaining structure where the building actively paid her to live inside it, laying the very first brick of her financial freedom. Before submitting her formal purchase offer, Audrey made one final, vulnerable attempt to invite her family into her expanding world. She called her father, Arthur, a retired electrician who could read a circuit breaker panel like sheet music, and asked if he would walk the Wren Street property with her on Saturday morning to inspect the furnace and evaluate the wiring. Arthur sounded genuinely pleased over the line, his voice warm with unaccustomed enthusiasm as he promised to bring his flashlight and tool bag at 10 sharp. On Saturday morning, as a cold Midwestern rain swept across Syracuse, Audrey stood on the soaked front porch of the duplex, watching the street through the heavy sheets of falling water. At 10:15, her phone buzzed with a brief text message from her father. Brandon's water heater let go. Basement's flooding. Gotta run over with the shop vac. Rain check, kiddo. Standing alone in the pouring rain, listening to the water dripping rhythmically from the rusted gutters, Audrey felt a familiar, quiet realization settle deep into her chest. Brandon's water heater, hounded by his perpetual carelessness, would always take immediate precedence over Audrey's milestone. Always in that exact order. She took a deep breath, wiped a stray raindrop from her cold cheek, and opened the front door alone, knowing the inspector she had hired for $400 was waiting inside. Inside the damp basement, the home inspector, a thorough man named Dale, crawled through the joists like a tick and discovered knob and tube wiring in Unit B's ceiling, an obsolete pre-war electrical system that modern insurance companies heavily penalized. A year earlier, those technical words would have intimidated Audrey, but after months of reading investment manuals during her ICU shifts, she recognized the discovery not as a deal-breaker, but as financial leverage. With cold, surgical precision, Audrey wrote a calm letter through her real estate agent, attaching the official inspection report and requesting a $6,500 seller concession at closing to remediate the system. The sellers attempted to counter at $5,000, but Audrey held her ground with complete composure, stating she would walk away from the contract if her terms were not met. They accepted her demand within hours. 3 weeks later, Audrey sat alone in a title office next to a vape shop, signing 60-odd legal documents until her hand cramped. The escrow officer kept glancing at the door, finally asking if they were waiting for a husband, a parent, or a realtor boyfriend to join them. "It's just me," Audrey said quietly. And when the woman slid a small brass key on a paper tag into her palm, Audrey knew she was officially a homeowner who had fought for her own place without asking anyone for help. That night, Audrey drove straight to Wren Street, carrying a single suitcase and a gas station turkey sandwich into Unit A, which smelled faintly of old carpet, fresh paint, and 1987. Sitting cross-legged on the bare wooden floor of what would be her living room, she ate her dinner in the quiet dark, listening to the muffled murmur of Mrs. Clara's television humming through the plaster wall, like a gentle heartbeat. At 2:14 the following Tuesday morning, just as Audrey walked in from an exhausting 12-hour ICU shift, her phone rang with Mrs. Clara's apologetic voice, reporting that the Unit B toilet was overflowing. Remembering Harlan Miller's cynical prophecy in the church basement, Audrey didn't panic or complain. She grabbed a flange wrench she had purchased at a hardware store, knelt on Mrs. Clara's bathroom floor in her blue scrubs at 2:30 a.m., and watched a repair video on her phone at half speed until she fixed the flush valve herself. It took 2 frustrating hours and a skinned knuckle, but when Mrs. Clara handed her a steaming cup of coffee in gratitude, Audrey felt a profound sense of self-reliance. She had faced her first operational crisis as a landlord without calling anyone for help, proving to herself that she possessed the practical strength to maintain what she owned in her new life. By mid-autumn, as Audrey began scouting a second distressed property on Marigold Street, she found an old wooden key rack buried under a pile of jelly jars in the cellar, carved from solid oak with 4 tarnished brass hooks and a faint wood-burned rose pattern from 50 years ago. The piece caught her eye in the dim basement light. That night, she sat at her Formica table on Wren Street, carefully sanding the worn wood, rubbing it with butcher block oil until the grain shone gold, and mounting it perfectly level on the kitchen wall beside her back door. On the first brass hook, she hung the small key to Wren Street. Standing there in the quiet kitchen, smelling the cedar oil, her mother's dismissive words from the pot roast dinner echoed clearly in her mind. "You've always been fine." Audrey looked at the 3 remaining empty hooks catching the yellow streetlight from the alley and made a solemn, silent vow to the empty room. If being fine was the only inheritance her family was ever going to hand her, she would compound it until it became an unshakable empire. She gave herself a strict 12-month deadline, out loud. 4 brass hooks, 4 physical keys, 4 properties, and not a single dollar from anyone else's envelope ever again. In late autumn, Audrey acquired property number 2, a severely neglected estate sale on Marigold Street, listed at $85,000, whose heirs in Florida wanted a swift, uncomplicated closing before the upcoming holiday season. The house featured stained 1970s shag carpets, peeling floral wallpaper, and an outdated kitchen. But a thorough structural inspection proved its underlying load-bearing bones were completely sound and solid. Audrey put down $17,000 from her disciplined savings account, allocated another $15,000 for building materials, and spent every free daylight hour outside her exhausting ICU night shifts tearing out old flooring, hanging new drywall, and applying crisp coats of fresh white paint. If you have never spent your day off removing 50-year-old carpet with a utility knife while wearing a heavy respirator mask, it is far more therapeutic than traditional therapy, and you end up with a pristine, gleaming hardwood floor at the end of the day. By Christmas week, a hospital records clerk signed a formal lease at $1,100 a month, turning the property cash flow positive. 6 months later, as the property value surged following her painstaking renovation, Audrey executed a strategic cash-out commercial refinance through Denise at the credit union. The bank appraised the fully restored home at $130,000 and issued a new portfolio mortgage for 75% of its value, returning roughly $25,000 in tax-free cash directly into Audrey's hands, while the tenant's monthly rent covered the new mortgage payment with room to spare. Real estate investors called it recycling capital. Audrey recognized it as the powerful second wind that would fuel her expanding empire. During those intense, physically demanding months of renovation, while shopping for drywall screws in the seasonal aisle at Home Depot, Audrey unexpectedly ran into her elder brother, Brandon, who was loading a sleek $600 outdoor pizza oven onto a heavy flatbed cart. Brandon was genuinely delighted to see her, chatting effortlessly for 10 straight minutes about how entertaining mattered now that he and his buddy Deke were officially launching a high-end real estate flipping venture. He pulled a shiny credit card from his wallet bearing their mother's name, Evelyn Vance, casually mentioning he was taking out a $38,000 home equity line against his Sycamore Ridge house to fund his half of the enterprise, peppering his rapid sentences with trendy industry buzzwords like sweat equity and passive income. Throughout the entire 10-minute interaction, Brandon never once paused to ask why Audrey stood before him in dusty work clothes, wearing a rubber respirator mask around her neck, with white drywall dust coating her dark eyebrows and hair. She watched him proudly wheel the heavy pizza oven out toward his sparkling truck, realizing with quiet, piercing clarity that he was stepping onto a dangerous financial tightrope without a safety net underneath. He had received a massive $60,000 head start from their parents' retirement funds, yet he was treating capital like play money, entirely blind to the grueling physical labor, sacrifice, and disciplined arithmetic required to turn raw dirt into real, lasting wealth for oneself and build an honest future. By May, utilizing her recycled capital from the Marigold refinance, Audrey placed 20% down on property number 3, a charming brick bungalow on Cedar Avenue listed at $92,000, located conveniently just one street over from a busy hospital shuttle route. A traveling respiratory therapist signed a long-term lease at $995 a month before the fresh interior paint had even fully cured, and the third shiny brass key took its rightful place on the rose-patterned wooden rack beside her back door. Later that week, sitting beside Harlan Miller at their usual REIA coffee table, Audrey proudly showed him her pristine financial spreadsheets, detailed repair logs, and padded vacancy reserves. Harlan grunted approvingly, adjusted her capital expenditure buffer with a sharp wooden pencil, and shared a rare, deeply personal memory about his own 51-year-old son, whom he had repeatedly rescued over the decades with shiny trucks, paid-off houses, and restaurant bailouts. I gave him everything he ever asked for, Harlan said quietly, his weathered, calloused hands tracing the rim of his paper cup with deep, unvarnished regret. He doesn't return my phone calls now, and he still doesn't know how to stand on his own 2 feet. What I learned, $200,000 too late, is that help which never asks a person to grow isn't help at all. It's just a slow, polite form of destruction. His heavy words echoed deep within Audrey's soul, permanently validating the firm emotional boundary she was quietly constructing against her own family's toxic, enabling dynamics. In early summer, Harlan offered Audrey a monumental transaction that would permanently alter her long-term financial trajectory. He personally walked her through a pristine 1938 brick duplex on Hawthorne Avenue, his very first investment property, featuring meticulous tuck-pointed masonry, original hardwood floors, and flawless mechanical systems, and offered to sell it directly to her for $138,000 through formal seller financing. He required a simple 10% down payment and an ironclad 20-year note at 6.5% interest, completely bypassing traditional banking bureaucracy and loan officers. Realtors would easily list this beauty at $155, but I'm carrying the note for you because you fix your own toilets and respect the dignity of the craft, Harlan stated flatly, imposing only one strict condition. Audrey had to spread her complete financial ledgers across his kitchen table to prove every property she owned was operating cleanly and honestly. Audrey laid out her 3 organized binders: bank statements, lease agreements, repair logs with skinned knuckle stains, and tax returns, watching Harlan read every single line for 2 hours while sipping a cold glass of buttermilk. When he reached the original yellow legal pad detailing her starting balance of $48,212 from the night of the pot roast dinner, he gently tapped the paper with his thick thumb and nodded silently. 2 days later, at an attorney's office, Audrey signed the official seller-financed contract, and that evening, exactly 18 months after buying her first duplex, the 4th brass key filled the final empty hook on her wooden rack. At Thanksgiving dinner that autumn, hosted inside Brandon's granite-adorned home and catered in an elaborate style by their mother out of expensive coolers, Brandon stood up during dessert to make a grand announcement. He boasted proudly about his $38,000 home equity line, declaring that his Trotwood flip property would yield massive profits before spring, while his parents beamed with visible pride and praised his brilliant vision. Audrey sat quietly at the far end of the long dining table, holding 3 cash-flowing rental properties, an ironclad seller-financed note, 6 generating doors, and a pristine ledger, and simply asked someone to pass the green beans without making a sound. As she prepared to leave in the freezing driveway later that night, her father, Arthur, caught her elbow and pressed a small, tightly folded piece of paper directly into her cold palm. "Gas money, kiddo," Arthur whispered softly under his breath, completely avoiding her eyes as he stepped back into the dark shadows of the garage. "Don't tell your mother." Audrey drove home along Route 48 with the folded $50 bill resting on her passenger seat like a silent, ghost-like passenger, pulling over into a deserted gas station parking lot as quiet tears welled in her eyes. A $60,000 retirement envelope handed across a white tablecloth in front of witnesses for Brandon. A secret $50 bill slipped into her palm in the dark with instructions to keep it quiet for Audrey. The exact painful exchange rate of being the child who was always fine in her family. In late February, Audrey's phone chimed with an unfamiliar local number, and a confident, articulate voice introduced herself as Paige Sterling, a senior business reporter from the Business Courier. Paige explained that she had been hearing persistent rumors about Audrey's rapid, disciplined acquisitions through REA network contacts, and wanted to buy her a cup of coffee to write a feature story for the business section. Audrey hesitated for 3 full days, grappling with the long-term emotional implications of allowing her private financial journey to become public record. Print news possessed a permanent, unyielding quality that internet posts only pretended to have. Once published, it would be clipped, mailed, laminated, and taped to refrigerator doors across the entire city. She carefully listed all the sensible reasons to decline: tenant privacy, hospital gossip, and the inevitable emotional storm from her family. Yet, when she sat at her kitchen table with her yellow legal pad and stared at the sole entry in her second column, she confronted the quiet truth she had been renovating around for 18 long months. She had been building an undeniable case file, secretly accumulating deeds, leases, and ledgers for a family courtroom that was never going to convene on its own. Agreeing to the interview was not an act of arrogance or petty retaliation. It was a deliberate, courageous choice to step into the light under her own name, no longer hiding her achievements or waiting for permission to exist. The following Thursday, the story broke on page 1 of the Business Courier's corporate section, placed prominently above the fold. The bold headline read, "From rent money to 4 front doors, PICU nurse builds portfolio in 18 months," accompanied by a striking photograph of Audrey standing on the porch of her Wren Street duplex, her arms crossed with quiet confidence against the classic brickwork. Inside the article, Paige Sterling had meticulously verified every single financial figure, featuring a detailed sidebar breakdown of Audrey's cash flow numbers, repair budgets, and a quote in bold type. "Nobody was coming to catch my mistakes, so I stopped waiting for help." By 7 in the morning, Audrey's phone was buzzing endlessly with incoming notifications, phone calls, and text messages. Her fellow night shift nurses taped the front page directly onto the break room refrigerator in celebration, flooding her inbox with rows of exclamation points and genuine admiration. Loan officer Denise left a joyous voicemail that was mostly chewing gum sounds and triumphant shrieks, while old high school acquaintances reached out to congratulate her on her extraordinary discipline. For the first time in her 32 years, Audrey was being seen clearly by the world around her, recognized not as an invisible background character, an emotional afterthought, or a silent workhorse, but as a brilliant, self-reliant architect of her own destiny who had built something lasting without anyone's permission. The public exposure reached her family at 9:40 that morning when Aunt Sharon, who had subscribed to the physical paper since 1989, snapped a photo of the front page and forwarded it to the family group chat with the simple caption, "Is this our Audrey?" Within minutes, the digital chat room erupted in confusion as relatives typed frantic questions, while Audrey's mother, Evelyn, remained completely silent for 3 straight days. Behind that wall of silence lay a mounting financial catastrophe that the family had been desperately trying to cover up with superficial excuses and denial. Brandon's Trotwood flip property had been sitting stagnant on the market for 8 grueling months without a single viable offer, as high carrying costs, unpaid contractor fees, and monthly home equity line payments bled his finances dry. The local housing market was not slow, as Evelyn repeatedly insisted to anyone who would listen. Houses that were priced correctly sold immediately, while houses flipped carelessly off a weekend course by 2 men with an outdoor pizza oven did not. On the 4th morning, at precisely 8:02 a.m., Evelyn's name finally illuminated Audrey's phone screen with a cold, imperative text message. "Come to the house immediately, please." Audrey read the text calmly, grabbed her coat, and prepared for the inevitable confrontation. When Audrey walked into her parents' kitchen, she found her mother, father, and brother arranged around the granite island like a solemn judicial tribunal that had already decided her guilt. The physical newspaper lay unfolded on the counter, displaying Audrey's face to the room. Evelyn didn't offer coffee or a greeting, launching immediately into a sharp, trembling indictment before Audrey could even take off her coat. 2 years, Audrey? Evelyn cried, her voice cracking with wounded pride, shock, and bitter anger. 2 years you've been sneaking around behind our backs, buying up half the city, letting your own mother find out from Sharon? You lied to this family. Audrey stood her ground near the doorway, observing the strange, telling choice of words. Not that she had built something remarkable through sacrifice, but that she had lied. Beside the window, her father, Arthur, held the newspaper in his calloused hands, moving his lips silently as he read her financial figures all the way to the bottom page, before starting over at the top in absolute quiet. Looking directly at her mother, Audrey replied in a calm, measured tone that cut through the room's mounting hysteria. "Nobody lied, Mom. I simply stopped offering updates to a table where not a single person in 2 years ever bothered to ask what I was doing with my life, because you assumed I was fine." Leaning against the granite countertop with his arms crossed over a sweatshirt, Brandon let out a bitter, defensive snort, attempting to maintain his usual superiority despite his looming financial ruin. He jerked his chin toward the newsprint image and smirked, aiming a final condescending barb at his sister. "So what?" Brandon sneered, his voice dripping with forced indifference and deep-seated insecurity. "You finally got yourself a house? Congratulations." The kitchen went deathly quiet, the heavy air suddenly thick with 20 years of unexamined family hierarchy, favoritism, and unearned privilege. Audrey looked at her 38-year-old brother, standing in a luxury kitchen funded by their parents' retirement money while his own unauthorized debt crushed him, and felt the quiet weight of her 4 properties, 6 generating doors, and 18 months of relentless physical labor settle firmly behind her eyes. She did not raise her voice, nor did she smirk back. Looking straight into Brandon's eyes, Audrey delivered a single, unhurried question that shattered their artificial world into pieces. Which one? The silence that followed was absolute and deafening, as her mother took an actual step back in sheer shock, realizing for the very first time that Audrey didn't just own a modest starter home. She owned a complete, cash-flowing real estate portfolio that far eclipsed their own. On a rainy Sunday evening, Brandon arrived alone at the Wren Street duplex for the first time in his life, climbing the front porch steps like a man walking up to a witness stand. When Audrey opened the door, her 38-year-old brother stood in her tiny kitchen, nervously turning his baseball cap in his hands, a silent, helpless gesture inherited directly from their father. Sitting at Audrey's Formica table, beneath the rose-patterned wooden rack, the truth finally tumbled out of him in a desperate, unstructured spill. He confessed that he had lost his logistics job back in November, that the consulting title had been an elaborate fiction for months, and that his buddy Deke had stopped answering his phone calls entirely. The Trotwood Flip property had become a crushing financial anchor, devouring his entire $38,000 home equity line while sitting on the market beneath what they owed, leaving him 2.5 payments behind on his Sycamore Ridge mortgage. "I keep waiting to feel like a guy who owns a house," Brandon whispered, rubbing his face with trembling hands as he stared at the 4 brass keys. "It's never once felt like mine. It felt like Mom and Dad's, and I was just house-sitting. And I even managed to screw that up. You had no safety net, and you built an empire, while I had a $60,000 head start, and I'm the one drowning." Audrey listened quietly, realizing the initial $60,000 envelope had never been a true blessing. It had been a heavy, suffocating anchor. 3 days before the scheduled family meeting, Evelyn arrived at Wren Street carrying a bakery coffee cake, her traditional diplomatic offering, and asked to tour the duplex. She walked through the rooms, running her manicured fingers along the window trim and testing the porch railing, murmuring subtle expressions of surprise. In the kitchen, she stopped dead in front of the rose-patterned wooden rack, touching the wood-burned petals as a flickering expression of old, buried grief crossed her face. "My mother had a key rack just like this on her kitchen wall," Evelyn whispered, her voice dropping its usual performative polish, as she shared a 34-year-old secret. She revealed that her father's 200-acre farm near Piqua, along with its historic brick home, had been willed entirely to her irresponsible brother, Gary, simply because Gary had failed at everything else and needed the rescue. Evelyn recalled standing in that farmhouse kitchen at 24, listening to her father say, "You've got a steady husband, Evelyn. You'll be fine." Looking at her mother's stiff posture, Audrey recognized the tragic generational cycle. Evelyn had swallowed that same dismissive napkin at 24 and spent the rest of her life enforcing the exact same cruel emotional triage on her own children. Feeding the child who was drowning was not favoritism in Evelyn's mind. It was a desperate, ingrained survival mechanism disguised as maternal devotion, repeating a deep childhood wound she had never had the courage to heal for herself. The following Sunday evening, the family reassembled in the Kettering dining room around the exact same ivy-patterned tablecloth for another pot roast dinner. Audrey sat in the squeaky folding chair from the garage, watching through 20 minutes of forced weather talk and casserole diplomacy until her mother signaled Arthur to bring out a thick manila folder. Arthur slid the folder across the tablecloth toward Audrey, the paper moving in an exact, haunting mirror image of the white envelope that had crossed the same table 2 years prior. Inside lay formal bank pre-approval worksheets for a complete mortgage refinancing, a cosigner line highlighted in bright yellow ink, and a ballpoint pen placed gently beside it like a sacred offering. Yeah. Evelyn reached across the table, taking Audrey's hand in a tight, possessive grip, her eyes wet with intense, absolute certainty. The loan officer says, with your high nursing income and pristine credit score, the refinance goes through clean, Evelyn urged, her voice trembling with emotional theatricality. It's just a simple signature, Audrey. It costs you absolutely nothing. You've always wanted to be a real part of this family, honey. This is what family does for each other. This is your moment to step up and save your brother from total financial ruin. Beside her, Brandon stared silently at his plate, while Arthur looked down at the floor, leaving Audrey holding the highlighted folder under the dining room light. Holding the ballpoint pen, Audrey evaluated the financial proposal with the razor-sharp clinical precision of an ICU nurse reviewing a critical lab panel. On paper, her solid income and strong credit score could technically absorb the liability, but she saw the devastating structural trap beneath the yellow ink. Co-signing meant taking on full legal responsibility for Brandon's $250,000 debt. If he missed a single payment, the bank would immediately garnish her accounts, jeopardize her 4 properties, and bleed her hard-earned enterprise dry. She looked at her mother's pleading, desperate eyes, then at Brandon's slumped shoulders, and finally at the yellow line where her family expected her to trade her freedom for their comfort. Slowly, intentionally, Audrey set the ballpoint pen back down on the far side of the manila folder, refusing to pick it up again. "No," Audrey said, her voice completely even, quiet, and unshakable. "I am not signing this document, and I am not writing a check." Evelyn gasped, as if struck, her face contorting with immediate rage as she slammed her hands onto the table. "He is your brother, Audrey!" Evelyn screamed, her performative composure completely shattering into pieces. "We raised you. We fed you. And the very first time this family asks you for one simple signature to keep your brother from drowning, you sit there at my table like a cold accountant and turn your back on us. After everything we did?" Unmoved by the emotional storm, Audrey stood up calmly, zipped her winter coat, and presented a real, structured blueprint for Brandon's actual growth. "I won't enable his destruction, Mom, but I will help him stand on his own feet." Audrey stated firmly, turning directly to Brandon. "We list Sycamore Ridge this week at a realistic price to sell. Sell the Trotwood flip to cut your losses, and settle with the bank before collections ruin you." When those sell, my Marigold Street house turns over in June. You can fill out my standard rental application, pay the security deposit from your own earnings, and if your numbers pass my screening, you sign my lease." She paused, letting her terms settle over the quiet room. "You will pay rent on the first of the month, and I will be the most boring, professional landlord you've ever had." Help that never asks you to grow isn't help, Brandon. I'm offering you the kind that requires you to become a real man. Evelyn shook with bitter anger, but Brandon looked up from the table, a quiet spark of genuine respect dawning in his eyes. Audrey squared the loose papers, turned toward the doorway, and walked out into the crisp night air, knowing with absolute clarity that she had just eaten her very last pot roast at that table forever. Sycamore Ridge was listed the following week, priced aggressively to sell, over their mother's emotional objections, closing in late June for $282,000. After satisfying the primary mortgage, liquidating the remaining balance on the equity line, and covering standard closing fees, Brandon walked away with roughly $6,000 in cash. And for the first time in his 38 years, absolute zero debt. The Trotwood Flip property sold that same spring for less than Deke and Brandon owed, wiping out their remaining investment capital without a trace. A cold financial reality Brandon now speaks about openly at Audrey's kitchen table, like a patient reading his own clear X-ray. In July, his formal application for a second shift warehouse position came through, granting him forklift certification and solid healthcare benefits. He filled out Audrey's standard rental application at her Formica table, paid his security deposit from his own warehouse earnings, and moved into the Marigold Street house under a standard, legally binding lease agreement. In 4 months, Audrey collected 4 rent checks, every single one delivered 2 days early. Brandon discovered that becoming a man who pays his own obligations early felt surprisingly good. A quiet, unearned muscle he never knew he possessed. Every Sunday morning, he arrives at Wren Street with his structured financial binder, receipts, and bank statements, sitting down beside Audrey to build a realistic, workable budget for his future. Every Sunday morning, he arrives at Wren Street with his structured financial binder, receipts, and bank statements, sitting down beside Audrey to build a realistic, workable budget for his future. One crisp autumn afternoon, while Audrey was charting patient vitals at the hospital, her phone vibrated with a text message from Brandon containing a single photo of his first paper pay stub and a stamped receipt for early rent. There were no emotional speeches or performative apologies attached, just the raw, unvarnished proof of his hard labor. Sitting on a break room chair, Audrey stared at the digital image, recognizing that tiny slip of paper as the very first thing her brother had ever truly owned in his 38 years of life. It carried an intrinsic weight that neither the granite countertops nor the 4-bedroom colonial could ever match. Brandon began to realize that the suffocating anxiety which had hounded his adult years was not caused by a lack of money, but by the hollow humiliation of living on unearned rescue packages. Paying his own way, even from a second-shift warehouse salary, granted him a quiet, grounded dignity that no retirement envelope could ever buy. When he met Audrey on her front porch later that week, holding his donut bag and financial folder, his shoulders sat lower, his posture erect and calm. He was no longer a golden child performing for an audience. He was a self-reliant man, learning the honest price of his own life, taking pride in his independence. Their family dynamic quietly restructured itself around this unvarnished truth, without any grand theatrical announcements or dramatic family meetings. While Evelyn refused to set foot on Wren Street after the coffee cake incident, sending only a brief birthday card in March with her signature inside, her silence no longer felt like an emotional punishment to Audrey. It felt like a quiet, permanent surrender to reality. Arthur, however, began showing up at Wren Street on Saturday mornings in his faded pickup truck, deciding without permission that Audrey's gutters, porch posts, and electrical outlets required his personal supervisory maintenance. In October, Arthur and Brandon spent 4 hours in the Marigold basement, rewiring an old junction box together, trading tools and mild arguments in the dim light. Listening from the kitchen stairs, Audrey heard Brandon let out a genuine, unburdened laugh that sounded like he was 12 years old again. The initial $60,000 retirement envelope was completely gone, absorbed into closing costs, realtor fees, and a failed flip. Yet, in its absence, Arthur and Brandon found a real, unscripted father-son connection that money had previously prevented. They were no longer benefactor and dependent, but two men standing on solid ground, holding flashlights in a clean basement, working together. From sunny Arizona, Harlan Miller sent occasional postcards written in short, blunt sentences without formal greetings or signatures, reporting that his young grandkid could finally swim laps and confirming that his former Hawthorne duplex was performing impeccably. All 6 of Audrey's rental doors were cash flowing with boring, predictable consistency, the absolute highest compliment in the real estate business. Every Sunday morning, at precisely 9 o'clock, Brandon's truck pulled up to the curb on Wren Street, and he walked up the porch steps carrying his budget binder and a fresh bag of bakery donuts. They sat at the Formica table together, reviewing utility bills, tracking savings goals, and calculating maintenance reserves with methodical care. Their parents' social expectations and performative drama had faded into background noise, replaced by a quiet, sustainable routine built on mutual respect and transparent numbers. Sitting by her kitchen window in the soft morning light, sipping herbal tea while Brandon balanced his checking ledger, Audrey realized that these simple Sunday hours were the most valuable inheritance her family could ever experience. They were not gathering to manage a crisis or perform for a family portrait. They were sitting together as equals, sharing a life that nobody had to pay for or manipulate. On a warm Sunday morning in late summer, Audrey stood on her front porch in the golden sunlight that filtered through the oak trees along Wren Street, holding a warm cup of coffee as Brandon's truck pulled up to the curb. He stepped out onto the sidewalk with his binder tucked under his arm, looked up at the solid brick porch built by their grandfather decades ago, and hollered the familiar old question from their childhood. Except this time, he was grinning with genuine warmth. "Hey, you home?" Audrey looked through the kitchen window, where 4 brass keys hung in a neat row on the rose-patterned wooden rack, catching the brilliant morning sun like musical notes in a quiet chord. Beside them hung her own car key, resting naturally on the first hook where it fit perfectly beside everything she had built with her own 2 hands. "Which one?" Audrey called back with a soft, triumphant smile as her brother laughed and climbed the wooden steps to begin their work. Standing firmly on her own porch, Audrey knew with absolute certainty that being fine had never been the consolation prize her family tried to hand her. It was the sacred, unshakable inheritance she had written for herself, one brass key at a time, completely free and unbowed.